The sunscreen bottle gleamed white against the July sand, and I watched my wife hand it to another man like she was passing him the keys to our marriage, which, in retrospect, she probably was. "Could you get my back, Bryce? Eddie never puts on enough." Allison's laugh carried across the beach, light and carefree, the same laugh I'd fallen for 15 years ago. Now it felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I'm Eddie Malloy, 39 years old, and until that moment I thought I knew my wife. I fix computers for a living at Henderson and Associates, a small firm in our faded New England town of Millbrook. Nothing glamorous about it, but it pays the bills. Allison's the lawyer in the family, climbing her way up at Morrison and Associates downtown. She's always been the ambitious one, the one with plans and dreams that stretched beyond our little coastal town." Bryce Carter squeezed a generous dollop of SPF 30 onto his palm, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Golden boy realtor, perfect teeth, the kind of guy who probably peaked in high school but never realized it. His hands moved across my wife's shoulders with practiced familiarity, and something cold settled in my stomach. "There you go, gorgeous," he said, his voice carrying that fake charm realtors perfect in their first week on the job. I stood 10 feet away, holding our daughter's beach bags like some kind of pack mule, watching my marriage dissolve in broad daylight. Maya, our 14-year-old, was building sandcastles with her 9-year-old sister Emily, blissfully unaware that Daddy was having what you might call an epiphany. "Eddie, you're staring," Allison called out, not bothering to look in my direction. "If you're so worried about sunscreen application, maybe you should have offered first." The group of friends around us, Jenny Morse, Dave, and Linda Patterson, the Kowalskis, they all turned to look at me with that particular brand of pity reserved for clueless husbands. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, and not a particularly interesting one. "Just making sure you don't burn," I said, forcing what I hoped passed for a smile. "You know how sensitive your skin gets." Bryce's hands lingered on Allison's lower back, right above the line of her bikini bottom. She arched slightly under his touch, and I watched 20 years of marriage evaporate like morning fog. "Don't be such a worrywart," Jenny chimed in, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. Jenny's been Allison's best friend since college, the kind of woman who collects gossip like some people collect stamps. "Bryce is just being helpful, aren't you, honey?" Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The way she said "honey" made my skin crawl. There was something proprietary about it, like she had some kind of claim on him too. Small towns breed strange relationships, and Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. Apparently, everyone except me. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. 3 hours until the last flight back to Boston, then a short hop to Portland. I could be home by midnight, sleeping in my own bed instead of this cramped hotel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. "I think I'm going to head back early," I announced to no one in particular. Allison finally turned around, Bryce's hands still resting on her shoulders like they belonged there. "What?" "Eddie, don't be ridiculous. We have 2 more days. Maya's got that soccer camp on Monday. I should get her gear ready." It wasn't entirely a lie. Maya did have soccer camp, but her gear had been ready for weeks. I'm nothing if not organized, a trait that comes in handy when you're planning your exit strategy from a 20-year marriage. "Soccer camp isn't until next week," Emily piped up from her sandcastle, because 9-year-olds have inconveniently perfect memories. "Prep camp," I corrected, booking the flight with my thumb. "Different thing." Allison's eyes narrowed. She's got excellent instincts, which makes her a good lawyer and, as I was learning, a careful cheater. "Eddie, you're being weird. Just sit down and relax. Have a drink." "I don't want a drink. I want to go home." The silence that followed was the kind that makes everyone uncomfortable. Dave Patterson cleared his throat and mumbled something about checking on the cooler. Linda suddenly became very interested in her magazine. Even the kids sensed the tension and stopped playing. "Fine," Allison said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I'd been hearing more often lately. "Go home. Run away like you always do when things get complicated." Complicated? I looked at Bryce's hands, still resting on my wife's skin like they had every right to be there. "Is that what we're calling this?" Bryce finally had the decency to step back, but his smirk never wavered. "Hey man, just helping out with sunscreen. No need to get all worked up." I wanted to laugh. Worked up? I was about as worked up as a man watching his life implode in slow motion could be. Instead, I picked up my daughter's bags and started walking toward the hotel. "Girls, pack up your stuff. We're leaving in an hour." "But Daddy," Emily started. "1 hour," I repeated, not turning around. Back in the hotel room, I threw clothes into suitcases with the efficiency of a man who'd finally figured out the rules of the game he'd been playing blindfolded for months. Maybe years. The signs had been there. Late nights at the office, new clothes, that particular glow that comes from someone paying attention to you in all the right ways. I'd just been too stupid, or too trusting, to see them. I left a note on the nightstand, short and to the point. "Found your sunscreen, buddy. Don't come home until you figure out what you really want. The girls and I will be fine." Then I walked out of that hotel room and didn't look back. The house felt different when I got home at midnight, like it was holding its breath. Maya and Emily had fallen asleep in the car, and I carried them inside one by one, tucking them into their beds with the careful precision of a man trying not to wake his children or his rage. 3 days. That's how long it took for Allison to call. "Eddie, what the hell is wrong with you?" Her voice came through the phone sharp and accusatory, like I was the one who'd been rubbing sunscreen on someone else's spouse. "The girls are asking where you are. Emily's been crying." I was sitting in my home office, surrounded by the tools of my trade: computers, cables, diagnostic equipment. The familiar hum of electronics was oddly comforting, like white noise for the technically inclined. "Tell Emily I'm at home, where I belong. Where are you?" "I'm still at the hotel, with our friends, who are all asking very uncomfortable questions thanks to your little disappearing act." Uncomfortable questions? I leaned back in my desk chair, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Like what kind of questions?" "You know exactly what kind of questions, Eddie. Don't play dumb." "I'm not playing anything, Allie. I'm just sitting here in my house thinking about sunscreen and how helpful some people can be with its application." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. When she spoke again, her lawyer voice was in full effect, controlled, measured, dangerous. "If you have something to say, just say it. I think Bryce has very thorough sunscreen technique, very hands-on. You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" Because from where I was standing, it looked like he'd had plenty of practice. On you, specifically. Another silence, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating responses, weighing options. It's what makes her good at her job, and apparently good at deception. "Eddie, you're paranoid. Bryce is a friend. He was helping me with sunscreen because my husband was too busy sulking to do it himself." "Right. And I'm sure all that late-night texting you've been doing is just friendly conversation about real estate." The sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit the target. Score 1 for the paranoid husband. "I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been different for months. I know you bought new underwear and started going to the gym. I know you've been working late on cases that don't exist, because I called your office last Tuesday when you said you'd be there until 10. Guess what? Building was empty." "You called my office?" "Eddie, that's thorough. Yeah, I'm good at that. Comes with the job. You'd be amazed what you can figure out when you actually pay attention." I heard voices in the background, muffled conversation that sounded like damage control. Jenny's voice, sharp and urgent. Bryce saying something about handling the situation. "I'm coming home," Allison said finally. "Don't." "What do you mean, don't? It's my house, too." "Not anymore. I changed the locks yesterday. Your stuff is packed and sitting on the front porch. You might want to get it before it rains." The explosion of outrage that followed was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. When she finally ran out of steam, I spoke into the relative quiet. "Ali? You still there? You can't lock me out of my own house." "Actually, I can. House is in my name, remember? You wanted to keep your credit clean for the partnership track. Seemed like a good idea at the time." "This is insane, Eddie. You're having some kind of breakdown." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally having a breakthrough. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." I hung up and immediately called Dave Patterson. Dave's a good guy, the kind of friend who'll tell you when you have spinach in your teeth or when your wife is playing hide the sunscreen with the local realtor. "Eddie? Jesus, man, what happened at the beach? Ali's been—" "Dave, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to ask Linda what she saw at the beach. Really saw. And I need you to ask her how long it's been going on." The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Eddie, listen." "How long, Dave?" "Linda thinks maybe 3 months. Maybe longer. She wasn't sure if she should say anything." 3 months. I repeated it like a foreign phrase I was trying to learn. "Well, that explains the new gym membership." "Eddie, I'm sorry, man. We all thought you knew. The way they were acting, we figured you were okay with it, or working things out, or I'm the kind of guy who lets his wife get felt up by the local realtor at family beach trips. That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant, Dave. Thanks for being honest." I hung up and opened my laptop. Time to do what I do best. Dig into the digital details of people's lives. Allison thought she was careful, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd left her email logged in on our shared computer, the one in the kitchen that we used for family stuff. The folder labeled Personal told a story that would make a soap opera writer weep with joy. 3 months of increasingly intimate emails with Bryce, complete with plans for weekend getaways, complaints about her clueless husband, and enough explicit detail to make me grateful I'd skip dinner. But the really interesting stuff was in the folder labeled Finances. Apparently, my ambitious wife had been making some ambitious investments. Day trading, cryptocurrency, something called a guaranteed return opportunity that had all the hallmarks of a pyramid scheme. She'd lost nearly $30,000 of her own money and was dipping into our joint savings to cover the losses. No wonder she'd been working late. She hadn't been working at all. She'd been trying to dig herself out of a financial hole while simultaneously digging herself deeper into Bryce Carter's arms. I forwarded the most interesting emails to my personal account, then cleared the browser history. If Allison wanted to play games, she was about to learn that her husband had been playing them a lot longer than she had. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Dad, Mom's here yelling at the front door. She says you changed the locks. What's going on?" I looked out the front window. Sure enough, there was my wife, standing next to 3 suitcases and a pile of boxes, poking at her phone like she was trying to stab it in frustration. She looked up and saw me in the window, and even from 30 feet away, I could see the fury in her eyes. Time for round 2. Allison moved in with Jenny Morse, which was either the best thing that could have happened to my revenge plans or the worst thing that could have happened to my sanity. Jenny lived in one of those converted Victorian houses downtown, the kind with thin walls and thinner privacy. Perfect for a woman who'd built her social life around collecting and distributing other people's secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wife was now living with the town's biggest gossip while trying to keep her own secrets quiet. I gave it a week before making my next move. During that week, Allison called 17 times, sent 43 text messages, and showed up at my office twice. I ignored the calls, deleted the texts, and had building security escort her out both times. The girl stayed with me during the week and spent weekends at Jenny's, an arrangement that suited everyone except Allison, who was learning that being the villain in your own life story comes with certain disadvantages. Maya, bless her teenage heart, had figured out most of the situation on her own. She cornered me in the kitchen on Thursday morning while Emily was getting ready for school. "Mom's been cheating on you, hasn't she?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Maya, that's not really something we should—" "Dad, I'm 14, not 4. I saw how she was acting at the beach. And I heard her on the phone with Jenny last night when I was supposed to be asleep." She crossed her arms and gave me a look that was pure Allison, determined, direct, and slightly terrifying. She was crying and saying something about how you'd ruined everything. I ruined everything? That's what she said. But Jenny told her she was being dramatic and that you'd get over it once you came to your senses. Maya made air quotes with her fingers, a gesture that somehow made the betrayal feel even sharper. "What do you think about all this?" I asked, because sometimes the best way to handle a teenager is to treat them like the almost adult they're trying to become. "I think Mom's an idiot," Maya said matter-of-factly, "and I think you should make her pay for it." Out of the mouths of babes and 14-year-olds. That afternoon, I made a call to Mrs. Harris, our 70-year-old neighbor who had elevated nosiness to an art form. Mrs. Harris knew everything about everyone in Millbrook, and more importantly, she wasn't shy about sharing what she knew. "Eddie, dear, how are you holding up? I heard about Allison moving out. Such a shame when marriages fall apart." Her voice carried that particular tone of sympathy that barely concealed excitement about having fresh gossip to distribute. "I'm managing, Mrs. Harris. It's been difficult, especially with the girls. They don't understand why their mother chose to prioritize other relationships over her family." "Other relationships?" The interest in her voice sharpened like a knife being honed. "I probably shouldn't say anything. It's not really my place to discuss Allison's personal choices." "Of course not, dear. But sometimes it helps to talk to someone who understands." I let out a carefully crafted sigh. "I suppose it's no secret that she's been spending a lot of time with Bryce Carter. The girls noticed it too, especially at the beach last weekend. Maya asked me why Mommy was letting Mr. Carter touch her like Daddy does." The silence that followed was the sound of Mrs. Harris's gossip engine revving up to full power. "Oh my," she said finally. "That poor child. And poor you, Eddie. I had no idea things had gotten so complicated. I'm trying to keep it quiet for the girls' sake. But it's hard when half the town saw them together at the beach, and now she's moved in with Jenny instead of trying to work things out with her family." "Moved in with Jenny? But I thought Jenny was dating that nice young man from the bank." "Was being the operative phrase," I said, planting the seed I'd been carefully cultivating since my conversation with Maya. "Apparently Jenny's been spending quite a bit of time with Bryce too. Small town, limited options, I suppose." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. I'd seen Jenny and Bryce together at Murphy's bar 3 times in the past month, always sitting just a little too close, always leaving separately, but within minutes of each other. In a town like Millbrook, that was practically a public declaration of involvement. "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Harris breathed. "You don't think—" "I don't think anything, Mrs. Harris. I'm just trying to focus on my daughters and move forward with my life." I hung up knowing that by dinner time, half of Millbrook would know that Allison Malloy was living with her best friend, who might or might not be sharing her boyfriend. By tomorrow morning, the other half would know, along with several creative embellishments that Mrs. Harris's network of fellow information enthusiasts would add to the story. Phase 2 of my plan involved a trip to Murphy's bar, the kind of local establishment where everyone knows your name and your business, whether you want them to or not. I timed my arrival for Thursday night when the after-work crowd would be thick enough to provide cover but small enough to ensure maximum gossip distribution. Bryce was there, of course, holding court at his usual table near the back, regaling a group of local guys with what I assumed were stories about his latest real estate conquests. He saw me come in, and his expression shifted from confident to wary in the space of a heartbeat. I ordered a beer and took a seat at the bar, close enough to be noticed, but far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. Patience is a virtue, especially when you're planning someone's social destruction. Eddie, Tommy Kowalski waved me over to his table. Haven't seen you around lately. How's things? Could be better, I said, accepting the chair someone pulled up for me. But I'm managing. Sorry to hear about you and Allie, Dave Patterson said quietly. That's got to be rough. Rougher on the kids than on me, I replied, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. They don't understand why their mother moved out to live with her friends instead of trying to work things out at home. Friends? Tommy looked confused. I thought she was staying with Jenny. She is. Jenny and Bryce, apparently. Modern arrangements for modern problems, I guess. The silence that followed was beautiful. I watched the information spread across the bar like ripples in a pond, each person processing the implications and filing them away for future distribution. Bryce's table had gone quiet, and when I glanced over, he was staring at me with undisguised hostility. Perfect. I finished my beer, said my goodbyes, and headed home, leaving behind a bar full of people who now had a very different understanding of the situation between Eddie Malloy and his estranged wife. My phone started ringing before I reached my car. The call was from Jenny, and she was furious. Eddie, what the hell do you think you're doing? I sat in my car in Murphy's parking lot, watching through the window as Bryce gestured angrily at his phone. Probably getting a similar call from Allison, who was probably getting calls from half the town by now. I'm not doing anything, Jenny. Just having a beer and talking to friends. You're spreading lies about me and Bryce. Am I? What lies would those be? You know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to make it look like I'm involved with Bryce, like we're all living together in some kind of weird arrangement. Aren't you? I asked innocently. I mean, you're roommates now. He's over there all the time. You leave Murphy's together. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we're friends, Eddie. That's all. And even if we were more than friends, it's none of your business. You're right, it's not my business. But when my wife moves in with her best friend who's also involved with her boyfriend, it does make for interesting dinner conversation. People talk, Jenny. You know that better than anyone. The silence stretched long enough for me to count 3 people leaving Murphy's and checking their phones as they walked to their cars. The Millbrook Gossip Network was working at peak efficiency. Eddie, you need to stop this. You're hurting everyone, including your own daughters. My daughters are fine. They're living with their father in their own home, going to their own schools, sleeping in their own beds. Their mother, on the other hand, is living with her friend and her friend's boyfriend, which I'm sure provides all kinds of educational opportunities. That's not what's happening. Then what is happening, Jenny? Explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting it looks like my wife left her family to shack up with her boyfriend and her best friend. If there's another interpretation, I'm all ears. I hung up before she could answer and drove home, where Maya was waiting up for me with a bowl of ice cream and a knowing smile. How'd it go, Dad? Your mother's going to be very unhappy with me. Good, Maya said, and meant it. The next morning brought a text from Allison. We need to talk. Meet me at Morrison & Associates at 10 a.m. I showed up at 9:45, dressed in my best khakis and button-down shirt, looking like exactly what I was, a middle-class IT guy who'd stumbled into a situation way above his pay grade. Allison was waiting in the conference room, flanked by her boss, Richard Morrison, and looking like she'd slept about as well as I had, which is to say, not at all. Eddie, thank you for coming, Morrison said, extending his hand like we were old friends instead of a lawyer, and the man whose wife was currently destroying her career with spectacular poor judgment. Allie thought it would be good for us all to sit down and discuss the situation. What situation would that be? I asked, taking the seat across from them. The situation where you're spreading malicious rumors about my client and damaging her reputation in the community, Morrison said smoothly. Malicious rumors. I pulled out my phone and opened the email folder I'd been saving for just this occasion. You mean like the rumor that she's been having an affair with Bryce Carter for the past 3 months? Because I've got about 40 emails that suggest that's not a rumor at all. Allison's face went white. Morrison's expression didn't change, but I saw his eyes flick to her with something that might have been annoyance. Or maybe you mean the rumor that she's lost $30,000 day trading and dipping into our joint accounts to cover her losses? Because I've got bank statements that tell that story pretty clearly, too. Eddie, you're taking things out of context, Allison said, her voice strained. Am I? Let me read you this one email from last Tuesday. Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Eddie's working late, so we have the house to ourselves until 10. That seems pretty clear to me. What context am I missing? Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Malloy, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset, Mr. Morrison. I'm informed. There's a difference. I scrolled through my phone. Here's another good one. Eddie's so clueless, he probably wouldn't notice if we did it on the kitchen table. Romantic stuff. Really makes a husband feel valued. Allison stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, I said calmly, because this is just the preview. The full feature presentation starts Monday morning when I file for divorce, and these emails become part of the public record, along with the financial statements, the phone records, and the very detailed timeline I've put together of your extracurricular activities. Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Malloy, perhaps we can work something out. A quiet dissolution, sealed records, everyone moves on with their dignity intact. Dignity? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. Where was dignity when my wife was letting another man rub sunscreen on her in front of our children and half the town? Where was dignity when she was complaining to her lover about her clueless husband who was working 60-hour weeks to support her legal career? Eddie, please, Allison said, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she sounded genuinely desperate. Think about Maya and Emily. Do you really want them to see their parents destroy each other like this? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 20 years, who'd given me 2 beautiful daughters and 15 years of what I'd thought was happiness. She was right about one thing. This was going to hurt the girls, but staying quiet and pretending everything was fine would hurt them more in the long run. I think about Maya and Emily every day, I said finally. I think about what kind of example we're setting for them about marriage, about loyalty, about consequences, and I think the lesson here is pretty clear. Actions have consequences, even when you're smart enough to think you won't get caught. I stood up and headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Allison? You might want to have a conversation with Jenny about Bryce. Turns out your boyfriend has been spreading his attention around more than you realized. Small town, limited options, like I said. I left them sitting there and walked out into the morning sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone was buzzing with messages, but I ignored them. Phase 3 was about to begin, and I had a charity gala to prepare for. The Millbrook Community Foundation's annual charity gala was the social event of the year, the kind of gathering where everyone who was anyone showed up to be seen doing good works while actually just gossiping and drinking overpriced wine. This year's theme was Building Tomorrow Together, which seemed ironically appropriate given how many relationships were about to be demolished. I hadn't planned to attend. Charity galas weren't exactly my scene, and given the current state of my marriage, showing up alone would have been like wearing a sign that said, "Ask me about my personal disasters." But then, Maya made a suggestion that changed everything. Dad, you should go to that fancy party Mom's been talking about for months. We were eating dinner in the kitchen, just the 3 of us, and Emily was pushing peas around her plate with the focused determination of a child who believes vegetables might disappear if ignored long enough. Why would I want to do that, sweetheart? Because Mom will be there with her new friends, and everyone will expect you to hide at home feeling sorry for yourself. But if you show up looking good and acting normal, it'll mess with her head. Sometimes I wondered if Maya was actually 14 or 41 with really good skin care. That's very strategic thinking. I learned from the best, she said with a grin that reminded me painfully of her mother. So I rented a tux, got a haircut, and showed up at the Millbrook Country Club looking like a man who had his life together instead of a guy whose wife was currently living in a soap opera of her own creation. The ballroom was packed with familiar faces, all of whom gave me the kind of looks usually reserved for traffic accidents. Horrified fascination mixed with relief that it wasn't happening to them. Allison was there, of course, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was standing near the silent auction tables with Bryce, who had apparently decided that formal wear made him look sophisticated instead of like a used car salesman in a rented tux. Jenny was with them, completing the triangle of dysfunction that had become the talk of the town. I grabbed a glass of wine and made the rounds, accepting condolences and deflecting questions with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent 2 weeks perfecting his public face. The key was to look slightly wounded, but dignified, like someone who'd been betrayed but was handling it with class. "Eddie, so good to see you here," said Margaret Foster, the Foundation's president and one of Millbrook's most prominent social gatekeepers. "I wasn't sure you'd be joining us tonight. Wouldn't miss it," I replied smoothly. This cause means a lot to me, and I wasn't about to let personal circumstances interfere with supporting the community. "How admirable. And how are you holding up? This must be such a difficult time." "It's been challenging," I admitted, "but I'm focusing on what matters most, my daughters and moving forward. Life's too short to dwell on other people's choices." Margaret nodded sympathetically, but I could see the curiosity burning behind her eyes. And Allison? How was she adjusting to her new living situation? This was the opening I'd been waiting for. "She seems to be adapting well to the arrangement. It's certainly unconventional, but I suppose modern problems require modern solutions." "Arrangement?" "Living with Jenny and Bryce. I'm sure they're all very comfortable together." I took a sip of wine and let that statement hang in the air like a perfectly timed punchline. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "All 3 of them? Living together?" "Well, Allison's staying with Jenny, and Bryce is there most nights. Whether that's temporary or permanent, I couldn't say. Not really my business anymore." I excused myself and moved on to the next conversation, leaving Margaret to process and distribute that information to her extensive network of fellow social arbiters. Within 20 minutes, I'd had variations of the same conversation with 6 different people, each time adding just enough detail to keep the story interesting without saying anything that could be considered outright slander. The beauty of small-town gossip is that you don't have to lie. You just have to present the truth from the most unflattering angle possible and let people's imaginations fill in the gaps. I was standing near the bar, enjoying the subtle chaos I'd unleashed, when Jenny appeared at my elbow like a perfectly coiffed, avenging angel. "We need to talk," she hissed. "Hello, Jenny. You look lovely tonight. That dress really brings out the guilt in your eyes." "Cut the act, Eddie. I know what you're doing." "I'm supporting local charities and making small talk with friends. What are you doing?" She grabbed my arm and steered me toward a quiet corner near the coat check. "You're destroying people's lives with your lies." "What lies?" "I haven't told a single lie tonight. Everything I've said is technically accurate." "You're making it sound like Bryce and I are involved, like we're all living together in some kind of weird threesome arrangement." "Aren't you involved with Bryce?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "It's complicated," she said finally. "I'll bet it is. Does Allison know how complicated?" "Eddie, you don't understand the whole situation." "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing both sides of this triangle for months. Good friend to Allison, secret girlfriend to Bryce, and puppet master to both of them. Jenny's face went pale under her carefully applied makeup. That's not... You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you've been involved with Bryce longer than anyone realizes. I think you encouraged Allison's affair because it gave you cover for your own relationship. And I think you convinced her to move in with you because it was the perfect way to keep tabs on both of them. You're insane. Am I? Then explain why Bryce's car was parked outside your house every Tuesday night for the past 6 months, always leaving before dawn. Explain why you knew about Allison's financial problems before I did. Explain why you were so eager to have her move in with you instead of trying to work things out with her husband. Jenny stared at me like I'd grown a second head. How do you know about Tuesday nights? I'm good at my job, Jenny, and my job is paying attention to details that other people miss. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken 3 weeks ago. Bryce's distinctive red Corvette parked in her driveway at 11 p.m. I've got dozens of these, going back months. Want to see them? Eddie, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Because while you've been playing games with my family, I've been collecting evidence. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with Allison about her best friend's role in destroying our marriage. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Jenny? You might want to powder your nose. Your mascara's running, and people are starting to stare. I left her standing there and headed back into the ballroom, where the evening's entertainment was about to begin. But the real show had already started, and I had front-row seats to watch my carefully laid plans come to fruition. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Allison had apparently spent the night processing the implications of my conversation with Jenny, and the results were about as explosive as I'd expected. The final text, sent at 3:47 a.m., was the most interesting. Meet me at the lake house, noon. Come alone. We finish this today. The lake house was a small cabin that Allison had inherited from her grandmother, about 20 minutes outside town on the shore of Millbrook Lake. We'd spent some of our happiest times there in the early years of our marriage, back when we actually liked each other and thought we were building something that would last forever. The irony of ending things where we'd begun them wasn't lost on me. I dropped the girls off at my mother's house with instructions to call me every hour, then drove out to the lake with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was it. The final confrontation I'd been building toward for weeks. Everything I'd done, every move I'd made, had been leading to this moment. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, weathered by years of New England winters and neglect. Allison's car was already there, parked next to Bryce's red Corvette and Jenny's white SUV. Apparently, come alone had a different meaning in adultery circles than it did in the rest of the world. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the 3 vehicles that represented the destruction of my 20-year marriage, and felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but a kind of grim satisfaction. I'd played this game better than any of them had expected, and now it was time to collect my winnings. The cabin door opened as I walked up the path, and Allison stepped out onto the porch. She looked exhausted, like someone who'd spent weeks running from consequences that had finally caught up with her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Wouldn't miss it. Is this where you tell me it's all a misunderstanding and beg me to take you back?" "No," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Resignation, maybe, or just exhaustion. "This is where I tell you that you win." I followed her inside, where Bryce and Jenny were sitting on opposite ends of the old couch like boxers in their corners before the final round. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Eddie," Bryce said, standing up with the kind of false confidence that comes from knowing you're about to get your ass handed to you, but hoping to maintain some dignity in the process. "Look, man, I think we all need to—" "Sit down, Bryce," I said calmly. "Adults are talking." He sat. I looked around the room at the 3 people who'd spent months lying to me, manipulating me, and generally treating me like an obstacle to their various schemes. They all looked miserable, which was exactly how I'd planned it. "So," I said, settling into the old recliner that had been my favorite spot during happier times. "Who wants to go first?" "Eddie, I'm sorry," Allison began. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for things to get this complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's an interesting word choice. I would have gone with destructive or selfish or maybe spectacularly stupid, but complicated works too. I made mistakes. You made choices, Ali. There's a difference. Mistakes are accidental. Choices are deliberate. You chose to have an affair. You chose to lie to me for months. You chose to move out instead of trying to work things out. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions." Jenny cleared her throat. "Eddie, I think you should know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to be a good friend to Allison. By encouraging her to cheat on her husband with your boyfriend? Bryce isn't my boyfriend." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to one of my favorite screenshots. "Because this text from him to you last month says, 'Can't wait to get Allie settled so we can stop sneaking around.' That sounds pretty boyfriendish to me." The silence that followed was beautiful. I watched Allison's face as she processed the implications, saw the moment when she realized that her best friend and her lover had been playing her just as thoroughly as they'd been playing me. "Jenny?" Allison's voice was barely a whisper. "Ali, I can explain." "How long?" Allison stood up, and I recognized the expression on her face. It was the same look she got when she was cross-examining a hostile witness. "How long have you and Bryce been together?" Jenny looked at Bryce, who was studying his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. "It's complicated. Everything's complicated with you people," I said. "Let me simplify it. Jenny and Bryce have been involved for over a year. Jenny encouraged your affair because it gave her cover for her own relationship and because she thought it would be entertaining to watch your marriage implode. She convinced you to move in with her so she could control both sides of the situation and keep her boyfriend close without anyone asking uncomfortable questions." "That's not true," Jenny protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Then explain why you were so eager to hear every detail about Allie's affair. Explain why you pushed her to leave me instead of trying to work things out. Explain why you suggested she move in with you instead of getting her own place." Allison was staring at her best friend like she was seeing her for the first time. "You told me Eddie would never forgive me. You said I should just accept that my marriage was over and move on. I was trying to help you see reality." "You were trying to help yourself," I interrupted. "And you did a pretty good job of it too, right up until you underestimated the clueless husband." Bryce finally found his voice. "Eddie, look, I know you're angry, but—" "I'm not angry, Bryce. Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. What I feel is something much more focused than that." I stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the afternoon sky like a mirror. It was peaceful here, quiet in a way that made the chaos of the past few weeks seem almost surreal. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, still looking out at the water. "Ali, you're going to sign the divorce papers I had drawn up, accepting full responsibility for the breakdown of our marriage. You're going to agree to joint custody with primary residence with me, and you're going to explain to Maya and Emily why you chose to destroy their family. Eddie, I'm not finished. You're also going to repay the $30,000 you lost gambling with our savings, with interest. And you're going to do it without contesting the divorce or trying to claim any part of the house, the retirement accounts, or anything else we built together during 20 years of marriage. That's not fair." "Fair?" I turned around and looked at her. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you were complaining to your lover about your clueless husband? Was it fair when you were planning weekend getaways while I was working overtime to support your career? Was it fair when you let another man put his hands on you in front of our children?" Allison started crying, but I felt nothing. The tears that might have moved me 6 months ago just looked like manipulation now. "Bryce," I continued, "you're going to stay away from my family, permanently. If I see you near my house, my kids, or anywhere I happen to be, I'm going to make your life very unpleasant in ways that will surprise you." "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining consequences. There's a difference." I walked over to where my laptop bag was sitting by the door and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "This contains copies of every email, every text message, every financial record, and every photograph I've collected over the past month. It's all going to Morrison and Associates tomorrow morning, along with a detailed timeline of Allie's affair and Jenny's role in facilitating it. It's also going to the State Bar Association, since Allie's been using firm resources to conduct her personal business." "Eddie, please," Allison whispered. "My career." "Should have thought about that before you decided to conduct your affair using your work email account. Did you really think I wouldn't check the computer logs?" I looked around the room one last time, at these 3 people who'd thought they were so much smarter than the boring IT guy who fixed their computers and paid their bills and never asked uncomfortable questions. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said. "You all thought I was clueless. You thought I was too trusting, too naive, too boring to figure out what was really going on. And you were right. For a while. But the thing about underestimating people is that eventually, they surprise you." I headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at Allison. 20 years, Allie. 20 years of marriage, and you threw it away for 3 months with a small-town realtor who was cheating on you with your best friend. I hope it was worth it. I walked out of that cabin and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear voices rising, accusations flying, the sound of 3 people finally turning on each other the way they'd been turning on me for months. I got in my car and drove home to my daughters, who were waiting for me with homework questions and stories about their day and all the normal, beautiful complications of real life. The other complications, the ones involving sunscreen and secrets and scorched earth revenge, were finally behind me. The game was over, and for the first time in months, I'd won.